In today's turbulent media landscape, it's pretty difficult for shonen anime and manga to stand out. I mean, it feels like there's a new series being released almost every single week. Therefore, Dr. Stone came as a really pleasant surprise back in 2017 as it provided us with an extremely unique take on this incredibly established genre. Instead of muscular men fighting each other via endless power-ups, this was a tale that centered around a scientific genius on a quest to rebuild human civilization from scratch after being mysteriously petrified for about 3,700 years. Yeah, that's quite an intriguing setup for a shonen series, but what makes Dr. Stone so special is the love and care author Richiro Inagaki has poured into our main protagonist, Senku Ishigami. Though Senku is a genius far beyond any of us, it's impossible not to empathize with the scrawny little guy as the series progresses. Thus, in this marvelous video, we'll do an in-depth analysis of Senku's origins, history, and anatomy in order to understand him a little better. However, before we move ahead with all the scientific miracles, please take a moment to hit the like and subscribe buttons. It might just be a small click for you, but to us, it means an awful lot. Now, get your notebooks out because here we go. Who is Senku Ishigami and what drives him? Senku is undoubtedly a very different kind of hero than the one we're accustomed to. Over the years, we've seen him grow from a scrawny scientific genius to a legendary leader capable of leading humanity into a new era. However, to understand Senku's journey, we'll first have to take a look at his origins. Once upon a time, before all the petrification in science, Senku was just an orphan who was adopted by the renowned astronaut Byakuya Ishigami, who used to be friends with his biological parents. Though the actual circumstances of Senku's adoption aren't really clear, the entire thing has a tragic ring to it. In Byakuya's presence, Senku was introduced to science at a fairly young age and developed a keen interest in the subject. As a child, he dreamt of going into space and began reading an unreal number of books about scientific experiments and inventions. Thanks to Byakuya, he would also find the resources to pursue his interests. Once he got into school, Senku befriended Taiju and Yuzuriha, who were the main supporting characters for most of the series. They began functioning as his assistants in a number of projects, like the time Senku deployed light objects into orbit with a self-made rocket. By age 10, Senku had conducted enough failed experiments to know that he required professional help and sent an email to NASA to tell them of his exploits. An established scientist called Dr. Zeno would then inform Senku that he required an extremely extravagant amount of resources to really succeed in his experiments. To accomplish this, Senku flew out to America where he would steal his father's credit card to finance his experiments. Sometime later, Senku also traveled to Africa after learning about Ebola, and yeah, we agree, that's a lot of adventures for a school kid. Senku's tale in the series begins on a typical day at their school, where Taiju decides that he's finally going to confess his love to Yuzuriha. Though Senku hands his friend a strange potion that gives him a 10 billion% chance to succeed, Taiju, the hopeless romantic, still wants to get a genuine answer from his lady love. Of course, the potion was nothing but gasoline, but this incident really tells you a lot about our protagonist's best friend. Anyway, Taiju's proposal really doesn't go as planned as the petrification occurs and turns everyone to stone before we can have an answer. With a flash of bright light, all of human civilization is instantaneously turned into stone. Somehow, Senku manages to remain conscious even after being petrified. Practical as always, he decides to keep track of the seasons, hoping that he can make it out of the stone before winter. However, all these hopes were in vain, as Senku's petrified statue would end up in a cave where droplets of revival fluid began to drip on him. For centuries, Senku remains in that place, counting every single drop, and when he finally wakes up, he notes that about 117,354,893,870 seconds have passed. This is equal to 3,719 years and 249 days, so Senku calculates that he emerged out of the petrification on April 1st, 5,738. Honestly, we don't know whether we could have been that patient even if we tried. After being freed from the petrification, Senku begins working towards freeing his friends and uses his scientific prowess to create a whole new way of life. His ultimate goal is to rebuild all of human civilization, and so far, he's been succeeding pretty spectacularly. What does Senku look like, and what makes him stand out? The first thing you'll notice about Senku is probably his almost white hair, which fades into a green towards the tips. His hair is weirdly spiky and unkempt, which actually kind of suits a crazy genius like him. He's also considerably puny and weak for someone of his age. However, his red eyes are extremely sharp and go pretty well with the cocky grin that's always plastered across his face. One can also spot two symmetrical petrification scars on his face, the jagged lines beginning from his inner eyebrows and leading towards his hairline. There are also some scars that lead down from his inner eyes. Before the petrification, Senku used to dress like an average school student but used to wear a lab coat over a standard uniform. After his reawakening in the stone world, Senku fashioned himself an animal skin tunic that had short flared sleeves and a jagged hemline. He ties the thing up with a belt around his waist with leather pouches attached to it. His shoes are also handmade and seem like sacks fashioned out of the same fabric as his tunic. He also tends to wrap the fabric around his arms, which often comes in handy for protection while conducting risky experiments. The most notable aspect of Senku's clothes is the mass energy equivalence formula scribbled onto his collarbone, making it impossible to miss that this guy's really into science. How does Senku's personality reflect his leadership style? Senku is known for his confidence and logical nature, even though his overly scientific rants can sometimes be incomprehensible to us normies. Even though his decisions might appear to be strange at first glance, they are always backed by his vast knowledge of the world around him. Though he is a genius, he never belittles others for their lack of knowledge and tends to dive into complex explanations whenever he's trying to teach others. His enthusiasm for science is often seen as a source of inspiration by the others around him and encourages them to do better. He is pretty charismatic, and people often look up to him even if they're enemies. Though he is rarely wrong, he usually accepts his mistakes and does everything in his capacity to correct them. He believes that there's nothing that cannot be explained by science and is always on the lookout for new revelations. He's usually a nice guy, but isn't averse to bending rules and manipulating others to get what he wants in the end. He likes to pretend that he's conducting his experiments just for himself, but deep inside, he knows it's all for the betterment of others. Beneath his arrogant facade, he is a truly selfless guy with a kind heart who never hesitates to go out of his way to help others. Tsukasa, one of the series' main antagonists, even states that Senku's greatest weakness is that he just can't abandon his friends. Senku's approach to romance is the exact opposite of Taichu's, as he is kind of apathetic to the whole thing. He actively discourages his admirers from developing feelings for him and is firm in his belief that a brain filled with love is the most illogical brain. Though he is very weak physically, he makes up for it through his endless determination and persistence. On many occasions, he has willingly faced death without being fazed and refuses to back down even in the worst of circumstances. No wonder that everyone around him sees the guy as a true leader. What are Senku's strengths and weaknesses? Senku isn't the type of protagonist who solves his problems through brute force or laser blasts. However, that's not to say that he can't fight when the situation calls for it. Through his lifelong dedication to science, he's managed to cultivate a vast set of skills that come in really handy in battle. Genius intelligence. This is the quality that you're most likely to associate with Senku. He is a true mental giant with an extensive knowledge of almost every scientific subject under the sun, be it chemistry, physics, geology, or even mathematics. This allows him to create a variety of tools, gadgets, and medicines that can help him survive the daily terrors of the stone world. Many characters in the series, like Tsukasa, revere Senku for being the sharpest, most intelligent man in the world. He's also extremely resourceful and can overcome even the direst of situations with his analytical mind. Mental resilience. Though Senku isn't anything special physically, he can easily make up for it through determination and persistence. During his time as a statue, he was able to keep his sanity by counting every second for almost 4 millennia. And here, we can't even focus for 5 minutes at a time. When he was petrified again 3 years later, Senku began to count the seconds again, which allowed him to maintain his consciousness. Craftsmanship. Senku is also highly adept at executing all his plans and machinations due to his excellent craftsmanship. From a fairly young age, he was able to create numerous functioning machines like miniature rocket ships. Though he's really great at building things, he still doesn't compare to a master like Kaseki in terms of experience, but we're certain he'll get there someday. Tactical intelligence. In addition to his scientific aptitude, Senku also possesses significant skills as a tactician and strategist. He was able to coordinate large groups of people and was even able to convert members of Tsukasa's army to his side. Now, if that isn't impressive, we don't know what is. Exceptional memory. Senku is able to easily remember every single compound and method involved in his inventions with uncanny accuracy. He's rarely wrong about facts when creating tools for his kingdom of science, and his vast knowledge would make even the brightest of scientists highly envious. Charisma. Though Senku is believed to be highly arrogant and eccentric, he can still be pretty influential even among strangers. He has a knack for understanding people and can use his creations to charm even those who are the most suspicious of him. This makes him a fairly capable leader, and he also has a way with words. This allows him to motivate even villagers and morph them into an effective army that's capable of standing its ground against Tsukasa's army of might. Linguistic proficiency. Senku is extremely fluent in both Japanese and English, which makes him an excellent communicator. Moreover, he can also use Morse code, which is a very handy skill to have, especially when looking to ensnare people. Weaknesses. Incomplete knowledge. Though Senku is clearly one of the most knowledgeable people in the entire series, he still has his limitations. It's evident that his knowledge isn't infallible, and he often tends to overlook the finer details. Despite this, he can sometimes fill in the gaps in his knowledge through well-informed scientific thinking and experience. Due to this, he has often struggled with problems that he wasn't completely aware of or things that he lacked detailed knowledge of. The greatest example of this flaw is the time Senku tried to make stone tools. Though he grasped the basic idea of how to create them, he still took a fairly long time to figure out how to actually make them via a process of trial and error. On one occasion, we saw that he was unaware of the fact that carbon filaments don't work in vacuum tubes, and he mistakenly thought that it would be practical to make the Steam Gorilla's engine with a single cylinder. Low physical prowess. Senku is woefully weak for someone his age and is below average when it comes to sheer strength and speed. He was unable to even hold on to Homura, a petite woman shorter than 5 foot, which shows that he really has no chance in a physical confrontation. In one of the bonus chapters, we see Kohaku giving a small description of the physical attributes of all the characters. Senku stands at the very bottom of this list. Moreover, he lacks stamina and is also vulnerable to environmental factors like hypothermia. Lack of cooking skills. Though this isn't as glaring of a flaw as his poor physicality, it still deserves a mention. Though he can cook when the situation calls for it, Senku is still pretty bad at it. He lacks the experience to make complicated food, so many of the items he makes, like wine, ramen, and bread, are pretty terrible. Bad luck. Now, we're not sure whether this can be considered a weakness, but this is something that Senku is constantly plagued with. His horrific luck has often led him into bad places, and even other characters have acknowledged that his luck is unusually crappy. For example, during the Petrification arc, Senku and the Kingdom of Science are cornered by Ibara, Maz, and their army after all their resources have been exhausted. Due to this, Senku was forced to revive the exceedingly cruel Hyoga just to have a fighting chance against his enemies. Later, when detailing travel by the Vikings, a storm hits their party. While starting out on their expedition in the USA, the entire crew is attacked by alligators, which makes it evident that Senku's luck is virtually non-existent. I guess the world's really unfair towards this one guy, but his genius more than makes up for it. How did Senku rebuild civilization after petrification? After being freed from petrification, Senku began working towards a singular objective: sustenance. He first created clothing and a makeshift house, but soon discovered that he would need more help in many of his ventures. Fortunately, he chanced upon a petrified taiju and began to work on ways that he could de-petrify people. He realizes that it's only the surface part of the statue that degrades, therefore it's also the only part that turns into a stone shell. Senku then heads back to the spot where he was depetrified and discovers that there was nitric acid in the drops that purified him. First, he tests his theory by using the liquids on some petrified birds and taiju, but it fails miserably. Senku then realizes that the human brain requires about 400 calories a day to stay alive, since his brain was active even when he was a statue. Thus, something in his surroundings must have provided him with enough energy that he could think for 3,700 years. He eventually comes to the conclusion that by adding alcohol to the nitric acid, he would create nitol that could theoretically help with the depetrification. However, he didn't have the resources to create alcohol and found himself at a dead end. He also realizes that taiju might revive on his own real soon, and thus he carves a message on the tree near Yuzuriha, which would lead his friend to him. As expected, taiju is revived, and the first thing he does after 3,700 years as a statue is to go see his love interest. Taiju follows the message and is finally reunited with Senku. Together, the two best friends form a formidable team where Senku functions as the brains, while Taiju provides the brawn. Taiju discovers some wild grapes in a nearby forest, which becomes the primary source of their alcohol. Senku begins to test this fluid on petrified birds, and miraculously it works. Guess who they try to depetrify first after discovering the revival fluid? Yuzuriha, of course. However, their first attempt didn't actually go so well. While depetrifying Yuzuriha, our heroes are attacked by lions and are forced to free the obscenely strong high school teacher, Tsukasa. Tsukasa seems to be a literal monster and displays an unreal amount of adaptation and strength by killing the leader of the lions with a single punch. Though Senku and Taiju manage to get to Yuzuriha, they realize they've run out of nitol and carry the petrified statue back to their hideout. Here, Senku begins to discuss his plan of bringing humanity back to the modern age by using the calcium carbonate found in seashells. During this discussion, we discover something rather disturbing about Tsukasa, as he seems to have genuine disdain for Senku's idea of modernity. We even see Tsukasa destroy statues of the elderly, which alerts Senku that Tsukasa will end up betraying them. Thus, Senku sends Tsukasa out to procure more nitric acid in order to buy some time. Once Tsukasa leaves, Senku reveals to Taiju that they must free Yuzuriha as soon as they can. After all, Tsukasa's strange behavior left them with only two options: either fight the monstrous high schooler or flee. Before they can even decide on their course of action, Tsukasa returns and declares that he intends to preserve this primitive world for the betterment of humanity. Tsukasa begins attacking Senku and the others in order to make them surrender. However, he's forced to give our heroes some time, as he still has no clue what the formula for the revival fluid really is. And, well, time is all our genius needs. He asks Taiju and Yuzuriha to escape from the location, but this is all a ruse. In reality, Senku hopes to use the calcium carbonate to create gunpowder. Taiju and Yuzuriha make their way to Hakone in order to get their hands on sulfur. However, Tsukasa isn't fooled by their plan and comes after the group straight away. Senku and his friends go to a high summit to test their gunpowder, but notice a smoke signal in the distance which confirms the presence of other humans. Though they really want to reply, sending out smoke signals would just alert Tsukasa to their position. Despite the risk, Senku instructs his friends to light up the smoke signals to establish contact with the other humans. As expected, Tsukasa catches up to them and manages to take Yuzuriha hostage. He begins pressuring Senku for the depetrification formula in exchange for Yuzuriha's freedom, and Senku finally gives in. Tsukasa then makes a final attempt to get Senku on his side, but Senku stands his ground. Tsukasa likes Senku's integrity and proclaims that had they met 3,700 years ago, they might have been really good friends. Then, in one swift movement, he breaks Senku's cervical plexus, leaving him for dead. When Taiju returns from the smoke signals, he realizes that his friend is no more. In his desperation and anger, he hurls a boulder at the ground, which leads to the gunpowder exploding. Seizing their chance, Taiju and Yuzuriha flee the spot along with Senku's body. Sometime later, when they stop to examine Senku, Taiju and Yuzuriha realize that Senku's neck is still petrified. When they apply the depetrification formula, the unthinkable happens. Senku returns to his senses, and we know that humanity still has hope. He asks his friends to split away and join Tsukasa so they can function as spies. With heavy hearts, the three friends part ways and head in different directions. Along the way, Senku discovered Kohaku, the person who had lit the smoke signals. It turns out that she is yet another victim of Tsukasa. Kohaku develops a liking for Senku and his scientific talents and decides to lead him to her village. Here, we learn that all the villagers are essentially the descendants of humans who managed to avoid the petrification 3,700 years ago and thus have no clue about what the modern world used to be like. Senku encounters a number of interesting individuals in this village, but the most remarkable is Chrome, the village sorcerer. Since Chrome views Senku as a sorcerer too, he challenges our hero to battle. Of course, Chrome fails miserably in this battle, but Senku reassures him by explaining that what he has been doing is not sorcery, but science. This makes Chrome the first human scientist in 3,700 years, and honestly, that's quite impressive. Senku settles down in the village, and Kohaku even introduces him to her sister, Ruri. Ruri has been sick for a while, and despite their constant attempts, no cure has been found. Senku decides to take on the challenge and begins to prepare antibiotics using sulfur, which can be found easily. While Chrome and Senku are gathering ingredients for the antibiotics, they begin to discuss how the Earth is spinning. Chrome reveals that he realized this due to some magnetic rocks in his possession. This gives Senku an idea, and he instructs everyone to pull the iron out of the river with the help of the magnets. With this, the Iron Age begins once again. They also meet Suika during this time. Chrome tells Senku that Suika is Momotaro, and this alerts our hero to the fact that legends and stories from the modern world are still prevalent in this era. Ruri, the priestess of the village, is one of the people who still remembers these stories and continues to pass them down through the generations. This increases Senku's interest in Ruri, but Chrome begins to grow a bit insecure as he is in love with the priestess. During his time with the villagers, Senku comes up with a bunch of other inventions, like ramen, which he uses to bribe the villagers and gain more manpower. He also encounters one of Tsukasa's accomplices, Gen Asagiri, a modern-day mentalist who wants to switch to Senku's side after learning that he has gained the ability to forge iron. Senku convinces Gen to join their side and then sends him out to Tsukasa in order to mislead him into thinking that Senku is truly dead. During this period, we also learn that in a few weeks, the village would be holding a tournament to decide the next chief as per tradition. Also, Ruri, the priestess who has just turned 18, would have to marry the winner of the tournament. Their main opponent is a guy called Magma, a guy who is hell-bent on getting the chief's throne, even if it leads to him doing some pretty terrible things. Senku lets Kohaku deal with Magma while he begins inventing glass, which is necessary for creating flasks which would be used in making Ruri's antibiotics. Senku recruits an experienced craftsperson named Kaiseki who helps him to create the perfect lab. Senku, Chrome, and Ginro then head to the mountains to procure sulfuric acid and somehow manage to attain the deadly substance. With this, Senku finally has the means to create the antibiotics that Ruri desperately needs. However, the path ahead isn't going to be too easy either. How did Senku become the chief of Ishigami Village? After acquiring sulfuric acid, the only thing that Senku requires to create the antibiotics is alcohol. Of course, they can get it from the village if they win the tournament. Thus, Senku, Chrome, and Ginro enter the tournament with one singular goal: to weaken Magma before his fight with Kinro, a talented warrior who could actually beat Magma. Unfortunately, all their plans fail when Kinro is paired with Magma for his very first match. Though they're evenly matched in the beginning, Magma manages to win the bout by hitting Kinro on the head and knocking him out. The next fight is between Mantle and Chrome, which Chrome manages to win after Magma instructs Mantle to throw the fight. Senku also manages to win his fight with Kohaku, as Kohaku abandons the tournament to save Suika, who is apparently in danger. The next round begins with Magma and Chrome. By this point, it's apparent that Chrome doesn't stand a chance against Magma's power, and the fight genuinely starts out as one of the worst matchups of all time. Magma begins by administering a severe beatdown on Chrome, and it seems that he really has no hope. Chrome, however, uses his head to crouch over a piece of Suika's helmet and pools his sweat into the lens. Gen, the mentalist, casts a spell that forces Magma to stand still while Chrome readies the lens. The lens ignites Magma's clothes and he begins to stumble back. Chrome then deals a final blow directly to Magma's weak spot, gaining a very unexpected victory. With Magma out of the way, our hero's victory is pretty much guaranteed, but the final victor of the tournament still remains to be decided. In the final fight, Senku takes on Chrome, and Senku is actually ready to surrender as he knows Chrome is in love with Ruri. However, Chrome passed out from exhaustion and was unable to make it into the ring. Thus, Senku became the chief of the village by default. An argument ensues as some of the villagers see Senku as an outsider. However, the majority see Senku's victory as the will of the gods, and Senku eventually gives in as he wants to get his hands on the alcohol as soon as possible. Now, with all the ingredients in place, Senku administers the cure and Ruri is saved. Everyone realizes that Senku is trustworthy and he has been officially appointed as the village chief. What were Senku's major adventures and innovations? Over the years, we've seen Senku invent everything from basic necessities to overly complex machines. Even before encountering the Ishigami village, he created things like ropes, bows and arrows, traps, leather, salt, nitric acid, and even earthware for distillation. He is also a successful chemist who has extracted things like ethanol, calcium carbonate, sodium carbonate, bronze, and acetic anhydride, all from the natural elements he found around him. After contacting the inhabitants of Ishigami village, he began inventing even more complicated machinery, such as makeshift chassis, electrostatic generators, blast furnaces, and even a dual hand crank dynamo. Over the years, he began inventing actual technology like hydroelectric power plants, lead-acid batteries, pistols, and even armored tanks. To be honest, Senku could genuinely be credited with bringing humanity back to modernity from a very primitive era. Senku is also extremely adventurous. This quality is best explored when he learns of all the 100 tales of Ishigami village from Ruri. He brought about a new age of exploration and visited lands as far away as America. However, his greatest accomplishment was the Stone World's first moon mission, during which he was actually able to put men on the moon. We think you'll probably agree with us when we say that Senku is one of the greatest thinkers our world has ever seen. Marvelous verdict! It's evident from this analysis that Senku is really different from all the protagonists we've seen in shonen anime so far. It's really refreshing to see a normal human overcome such overwhelming challenges just through his intellect and plain logic. This is what makes Senku one of the most memorable protagonists of the last decade, and we hope we hear from him once again in the future. But what do you think? Does Senku deserve the title of genius or not? Let us know in the comments section down below, but thanks for watching, stay safe out there, and of course, have a marvelous day.